What if a ghost solved her own murder? What if the dead could speak from beyond the grave and point a finger directly at their killer? And what if a court of law actually listened? This is not a horror story. This is not a legend. This is a real legal case from 1897 in the state of West Virginia. A case so extraordinary that it remains the only known instance in American history where testimony about a ghost directly led to a murder conviction. This is the story of Zona Heaster Shue and the truth she told her mother from the other side of death. The year was 1896. Greenbrier County, West Virginia. A small, tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone and life moved slowly and quietly through the mountains. Zona Heaster was a young woman in her 20s, pretty, spirited, and independent for her time. She had already had one child out of wedlock, which in that era and that community carried a heavy social stigma. But Zona was not the kind of woman who let the opinions of others define her. She carried herself with quiet dignity and got on with her life. Then she met Erasmus Stribling Trout Shue. Shue had arrived in Greenbrier County as a newcomer, a blacksmith looking for work. He was tall, charming, and magnetic. He swept Zona off her feet almost immediately. Their courtship was fast and intense. Within months, they were married. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, did not trust him. Not from the very first moment she laid eyes on him. She could not explain it. There was no specific reason she could point to. Just a deep, instinctive unease that sat in her chest every time she saw the man her daughter had chosen to marry. She prayed she was wrong. She tried to accept him. But something about Erasmus Shue made her skin crawl. She would later say that God had been warning her all along. January 23rd, 1897. A young boy named Andy Jones was sent to the Shue home by Erasmus to do some errands. When Andy arrived at the house, he found the front door open. He called out. No answer. He stepped inside. He found Zona lying at the bottom of the stairs. She was stretched out flat on her back, her arms at her sides, her legs straight, her eyes staring at the ceiling. She was completely still. Andy ran. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him to get help. By the time the local doctor, a man named George Knapp, arrived at the house, Erasmus Shue was already there. He had carried Zona's body upstairs and dressed her himself. He had put her in a high-necked dress with a stiff collar and a large scarf tied tightly around her neck. He held her head in his hands and wept loudly and dramatically, swaying back and forth with grief. When Dr. Knapp attempted to examine the body, Shue became agitated. He hovered. He refused to move away. Every time the doctor tried to examine Zona's neck, Shue shifted his body in the way, pressing his hands against her head, making it impossible to get a clear look. Dr. Knapp was uncomfortable, but Shue was the grieving husband. And in 1897, in a small mountain community, you did not push a grieving husband aside to examine his dead wife's neck more thoroughly. Knapp completed what examination he could and recorded the cause of death as everlasting faintness, which he later changed to childbirth, despite no evidence of pregnancy. Eventually, the official cause was listed simply as unknown. Zona was buried. The community mourned, and Erasmus Shue performed his grief loudly and publicly for everyone to see, weeping at the funeral, throwing himself across the coffin, behaving in a way that people later described as excessive, almost theatrical. But something else happened at that funeral that nobody could quite explain. Mary Jane Heaster, Zona's mother, received the sheet that had been used to wrap her daughter's body for burial. It was a white sheet, a plain, ordinary white sheet. When she tried to wash it, the water in the basin turned red. She poured it out and tried again with fresh water. The water turned red again. She removed the sheet and looked at it. The sheet itself showed no stain, but the water kept turning red. She kept the sheet. She folded it away, and she began to pray. Every single night for 4 weeks, Mary Jane Heaster knelt by her bed and prayed. She prayed for God to show her the truth about what had happened to her daughter. She prayed with the intensity of a woman who had nothing left but faith and a mother's love and a burning certainty that something was deeply, terribly wrong. And then, on the 4th week, Zona came to her. Mary Jane Heaster would later describe it not as a dream, but as something far more real than any dream she had ever had. Zona appeared to her 4 nights in a row. Each night she was clearer than the night before. Each night she told her mother more. Zona told her that Erasmus Shue had been a violent and controlling husband, that he had flown into a rage one evening because there was no meat prepared for his dinner, that in that rage he had grabbed her by the throat, that he had wrung her neck, that he had broken it. On the final night, Zona turned her head completely around to prove it, to show her mother exactly what had been done to her. Mary Jane Heaster did not go home and lie down and convince herself it had been a dream. She was not that kind of woman. She went directly to the local prosecutor, a man named John Alfred Preston, and she told him everything her daughter had told her. Most men in Preston's position would have smiled politely and sent the grieving woman home. A ghost story was not evidence. A mother's grief was not probable cause. And reopening a case that had already been closed was not something done lightly. But Preston listened, and something about Mary Jane Heaster made him take her seriously. Perhaps it was the absolute calm with which she described what had happened. She was not hysterical. She was not confused. She was simply a woman stating facts, the way a witness states facts, clearly and without embellishment. Preston began making quiet inquiries. He spoke to people in the community. He listened to the rumors that had been circulating since Zona's death, and the more he listened, the more uncomfortable he became. He ordered the body exhumed. On February 22, 1897, 1 month after Zona's burial, her body was dug up and a proper autopsy was performed. 3 doctors conducted the examination, including Dr. Knapp, who had signed the original death certificate. What they found confirmed everything. Zona's neck had been broken. The first vertebra of her spine was dislocated. The ligaments surrounding it were torn. The windpipe showed bruising consistent with manual strangulation. There was no ambiguity, no room for alternative explanation. Elva Zona Heaster Shue had been murdered. Her neck had been wrung like a cloth being twisted dry. Erasmus Shue was arrested and charged with murder. The trial began in June 1897, and it drew enormous attention. People came from all over the county to watch, because everyone knew the story. Everyone knew that this case had been broken open, not by a detective or an investigator, but by a dead woman speaking to her mother in the night. The prosecution presented the medical evidence clearly and methodically. The broken neck, the torn ligaments, the bruising, the physical evidence was solid. But then Mary Jane Heaster took the stand. The defense attorney made a critical mistake, thinking he could discredit her by making her look like a delusional, grief-stricken old woman who had invented ghost stories to get revenge on her son-in-law. He pressed her hard on the apparitions. He asked her in detail about what she had seen. He tried to get her to contradict herself. He tried to make her look foolish. She did not flinch once. She answered every question calmly, clearly, and with absolute consistency. She described what Zona had told her. She described how Zona had demonstrated the broken neck by turning her head completely around. She did not dress it up. She did not perform for the crowd. She simply told the truth as she had experienced it, and she did not back down from a single word of it. The defense attorney sat down. He had not discredited her. He had given her a platform. The jury deliberated. They came back with a verdict of guilty. Erasmus Shue was convicted of the murder of his wife, Elva Zona Heaster Shue, and sentenced to life in prison. He died in the Moundsville Penitentiary in 1900, 3 years into his sentence. He never confessed. He maintained his innocence until the end, but the evidence was overwhelming, and a jury of his peers believed it. Now here is the question that this case leaves hanging in the air more than 100 years later. Did the ghost of Zona Heaster actually appear to her mother? Did the dead speak? Did something cross the boundary between this world and whatever lies beyond it, driven by the unbearable injustice of an innocent woman murdered in her own home by the man who was supposed to love her? Or was Mary Jane Heaster simply a brilliant, determined mother who knew in her bones that her son-in-law was a killer and used the only tool available to her in 1897 to force a reluctant system to listen? Did she invent the ghost story deliberately, knowing it was the one thing dramatic enough to make a prosecutor reopen a closed case? Was it grief transformed into strategy? The honest answer is that nobody knows. What we know is this: the medical evidence was real. The broken neck was real. The murder was real. Erasmus Shue killed his wife. That much is certain. Whether Zona told her mother from beyond the grave, or whether her mother simply refused to let her daughter's murder go unanswered, the result was the same. Justice was done. In Greenbrier County, West Virginia, there is a historical marker today that commemorates the case. It reads, in part, that Zona Heaster Shue's ghost, the Greenbrier ghost, was the only ghost in American history to have testimony about its appearance accepted in a court of law as evidence contributing to a murder conviction. She was murdered. She was buried. And somehow, in some way that nobody can fully explain, the truth came out anyway. Some people say that love is the most powerful force in the universe, that a mother's love in particular cannot be contained by something as small and ordinary as death. Mary Jane Heaster prayed for 4 weeks in the dark. She prayed for the truth, and the truth came to her. Maybe that is all the explanation we need. And maybe it is no explanation at all. Zona Heaster Shue, murdered 1897, avenged 1897, never forgotten. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button, share it with someone who loves a good mystery, and subscribe to the channel right now and hit the bell icon so you never miss what comes next.